I'm Myra Delacroix, 32 years old. 3 months ago, at my sister's wedding in front of 247 guests from Boston's elite society, my mother grabbed the microphone and announced that I had agreed to give my $4.2 million penthouse to my sister as a wedding gift. I had agreed to nothing. When I walked up to that stage and said no, when I told the truth, that I had bought that apartment with my own money and paid it off 3 years ago, my mother slapped me so hard my diamond earring flew across the ballroom and landed in a stranger's champagne glass. 247 people watched. My father stood frozen at the bar. My sister smiled. Not a single person in that room said a word in my defense. So I picked up my earring, walked out, and made one phone call. 58 minutes later, a man walked into that reception, and the moment my mother saw who it was, she started screaming because she finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this story. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. This is the story of how I lost my family and finally found myself. I pulled my black Tesla Model S into the valet line at the Harbor Grand Hotel at exactly 6:47 p.m. The wedding wasn't supposed to start until 7, but I'd learned long ago that arriving early meant fewer opportunities for my mother to find fault. The October air carried the salt and seaweed scent of Boston Harbor as I handed my keys to the attendant. Through the grand entrance, I could see the glittering chandeliers of the Wellington Ballroom, where my little sister Victoria was about to marry into the Hartley family. Old money, commercial real estate, the kind of name that opened doors before you even knocked. I smoothed down my emerald green cocktail dress. Valentino, purchased with my own money, though no one in my family would think to ask, and walked inside. The memory hit me before I even reached the reception desk. 10 years ago, I'd graduated top of my MBA class at Boston University. I'd sent my parents 4 tickets to the ceremony. They'd used 0. Victoria had a photo shoot that day, something for a local boutique's Instagram, and apparently that took precedence over their eldest daughter's academic achievement. I'd walked across that stage alone, shook the dean's hand, and told myself it didn't matter. I was still telling myself that a decade later. Myra, there you are, my mother's voice cut through the ambient music. Eleanor Delacroix stood near the entrance in a silver mother-of-the-bride gown, her ash-blonde hair swept into an immaculate updo. She barely glanced at me before turning to a nearby couple. "This is my oldest daughter," she said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "She works at some bank or something." Some bank. I managed $2.3 billion in assets at Meridian Capital Partners, but to my mother, I would always be something. The seating chart confirmed what I already suspected. Table 14, the Siberia of the Wellington Ballroom, tucked behind a decorative column positioned directly next to the kitchen service entrance. Every few minutes, the swinging doors would release a gust of steam and the clatter of plates. I found my place card wedged between 2 names I didn't recognize. Gerald Patterson from my father's accounting firm and someone named Doris, who turned out to be a distant cousin twice removed from my mother's side. Neither of them seemed particularly interested in conversation, which suited me fine. From my exiled vantage point, I had a clear view of Table 1. Victoria sat at the center, radiant in a custom Vera Wang that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Her fiancé, Bradley Hartley, sat beside her, looking appropriately handsome and appropriately bland. The table was draped in white orchids and roses, a $15,000 arrangement, according to the wedding coordinator my mother had been bragging about for months. 12 guests surrounded my sister, my parents, Bradley's parents, the Hartley grandparents, 3 of Victoria's closest friends. The table gleamed with crystal and candlelight. I picked up my place card. Someone had written Myra Delacroix in elegant calligraphy. Not even my name, spelled correctly. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I glanced down. Everything okay? I'm 30 minutes away if you need me. Harrison. My chest tightened with a complicated mix of longing and guilt. 2 years we'd been together, 6 months engaged, and my family still didn't know he existed. I'd kept him separate from this world, protected him from it, really. Or maybe I'd been protecting myself from their judgment. "I'm fine," I typed back. "Don't come yet. I'll call if I need you." I pressed send, not knowing those words would become a lie within the hour. The gift opening ceremony began at 8:15 p.m., right after the main course. Victoria sat on a velvet settee that had been positioned near the head table, Bradley beside her, while guests gathered around with champagne flutes in hand. A photographer circled like a hawk, capturing every moment of manufactured joy. "From Grandmother Hartley," the wedding coordinator announced, presenting an antique silver tea service that had apparently been in the family since the 1890s. Victoria's eyes lit up. "Oh, it's gorgeous!" "From Bradley's parents," came the next announcement. A check for $20,000 tucked inside a Tiffany card holder. More appropriate gasps, more gracious smiles. Then the coordinator lifted my gift, a cream envelope with the logo of the Four Seasons Maldives embossed in gold. "From your sister, Myra." I'd spent 3 months planning that honeymoon. A 2-week stay at the resort's water villa, overwater bungalow with private infinity pool, sunset dolphin cruise included. Total cost, $48,000, paid in full from my personal account 6 months ago. Victoria opened the envelope, scanned the contents. Her expression flickered for exactly half a second before settling into something polite and distant. "Oh," she said. "Nice. Thanks." No hug, no squeal of excitement, not even the courtesy of standing up. I heard my mother lean toward Patricia Hartley, her whisper carrying just far enough. She probably used airline miles. Mrs. Hartley nodded with the practiced sympathy of someone who didn't want to get involved. I said nothing. I'd learned long ago that defending myself only made things worse. In this family, silence was the safest currency. Victoria was already reaching for the next gift, and I was already invisible again. I needed air. The balcony off the Wellington Ballroom offered a view of Boston Harbor that probably justified half the venue's rental fee. The city lights reflected off the dark water in ribbons of gold and white. In the distance, I could see the silhouette of the Seaport District, and somewhere in that cluster of high-rises, my penthouse. The one I'd bought with 10 years of 80-hour weeks and 127 monthly payments. My phone buzzed again. This time, not a text. A call. The screen glowed with a single letter. "Shh." I declined it, my thumb moving before my brain could catch up. Then I typed quickly. "I'm fine. Don't come yet. I'll call if I need you." The response came in seconds. H. "Remember, you don't owe them your silence." I stared at those words until my screen dimmed. 2 years ago, I'd been at a gala for the Boston Foundation for the Arts. One of those networking events where I stood in corners and hoped no one would ask about my family. A man had approached me, tall, dark hair with distinguished silver at the temples, a suit that cost more than my first car. "You're the portfolio manager at Meridian, aren't you?" he'd said. "I read your Q3 analysis. Impressive work." Harrison Whitmore, senior partner at Whitmore and Associates, one of the most respected real estate attorneys in New England. He'd looked at me, really looked, and asked, "Why are you standing alone in the corner when you're clearly the smartest person here?" No one had ever asked me that before. No one had ever seen me before. I slipped my phone back into my clutch and returned to the ballroom. I didn't know I was walking toward the moment that would change everything. To understand what happened next, you need to understand the Penthouse. 8 years ago, I was 24, freshly promoted from analyst to associate at Meridian Capital. My salary had finally crossed 6 figures, and I was determined to stop renting. The unit at One Seaport Place had been a stretch, 1,800 square feet of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, listed at $1.2 million. I had the down payment. I had the income verification. What I didn't have was a credit history long enough to satisfy First Atlantic Bank's underwriting department. "We need a co-signer," the loan officer had said apologetically. So I'd gone to my parents. My mother had made me wait 3 days for an answer. When she finally agreed, she'd looked at me with that particular smile she reserved for moments of condescension. "Remember, Myra, without us, you'd have nothing." I'd signed the papers, thanked them, moved in, and then I'd spent the next 5 years working myself to the bone. 3 years ago, March 15th, 2022 to be exact, I'd walked into First Atlantic Bank and refinanced the entire mortgage, paid off the remaining $1.8 million balance in full. The new deed listed one owner, Myra Delacroix. My parents' names had been removed from every document. I still had the confirmation email saved in my inbox. Subject line: "Congratulations on full ownership, Ms. Delacroix." I'd never told them. There hadn't seemed like a reason to. We barely spoke outside of holidays, and they'd never asked about the apartment they supposedly gave me. They still believed they owned it. They still believed they owned me. Tonight, standing in that ballroom watching my sister open gifts I could have never afforded at 28, I realized that belief was about to be tested. The question crystallized in my mind with uncomfortable clarity. What would I actually lose if I gave in? I'd done the math 100 times before, usually late at night, usually after a phone call with my mother that left me feeling hollowed out. The calculation was always the same. The penthouse was worth $4.2 million now. Seaport property values had nearly quadrupled since 2016, and my corner unit had become one of the most sought-after addresses in the city. But money wasn't really the point. 10 years. That's what I'd lose. 10 years of skipped vacations because I needed to hit my quarterly targets. 127 mortgage payments withdrawn automatically on the first of every month. 2,847 hours of overtime. I'd tracked it once, during a particularly dark period when I needed proof that my sacrifice meant something. And beyond the numbers, I'd lose the only place that had ever felt like home. The one space in this world where no one criticized my choices, or compared me to my sister, or forgot how to spell my name. If I handed over those keys, I'd be telling myself, and my family, that none of it mattered. That Myra's decade of discipline could be erased with a single demand. And here's what I knew with absolute certainty. It wouldn't end with the penthouse. If I gave them this, they'd want more. They always wanted more. My phone buzzed. Not Harrison this time. A notification from my work email. From Daniel Cross, CFO, Meridian Capital Partners. Subject: Q3 results. Body: Myra, just saw your fund hit 2.4 BAUM this quarter. Congrats, you've earned every cent. I stared at that email for a long moment. I managed $2.4 billion for other people. Maybe it was time to manage my own life. I surveyed the ballroom with new eyes. 247 guests, according to the seating chart. My father's business partners from Delacroix Motors, 4 luxury car dealerships across New England. My mother's charity circle from the Boston Heritage Foundation, where she'd served as chairwoman for the past 6 years. The Hartley family's extensive network of developers, investors, and old money connections. These were the people my mother lived to impress. Every decision she made, from the flowers on the tables to the brand of champagne being poured, had been calculated to demonstrate the Delacroix family's status. And suddenly, I understood why she'd waited until tonight. This was her arena, her audience. She'd spent 30 years cultivating these relationships, and she expected that social pressure to do what she couldn't, force me to comply. Who would refuse their own mother in front of 247 witnesses? Who would risk being labeled difficult, ungrateful, selfish? For 32 years, I'd been that daughter, the one who bent, who apologized, who made herself small enough to fit into the space they'd allotted me. But something had shifted. Maybe it was Daniel's email. Maybe it was the misspelled place card. Maybe it was the years of accumulated slights, finally reaching critical mass. I managed $2.4 billion for strangers, I thought. It's time I advocated for myself with a fraction of that energy. The sound of the microphone squealing snapped me back to the present. At the front of the ballroom, my mother was climbing the 3 steps to the small stage where the band had been playing. She was holding a champagne flute, and her smile had that particular edge I recognized from childhood, the one that meant she was about to perform. "Everyone," Eleanor announced, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter, "I have a very special announcement." My stomach dropped. "Family," my mother began, her voice warm with practiced sincerity, "is about sacrifice." She stood center stage, the spotlight catching the crystals on her gown. Behind her, a projection screen displayed a montage of Victoria's childhood photos, all carefully curated, all featuring Victoria alone or with our parents. I appeared in exactly none of them. When Richard and I raised our daughters, we taught them that family comes first, that what we build together. I felt the first prickle of unease at the base of my skull. And tonight, I'm so proud to share that our eldest daughter, Myra, has decided to demonstrate that family love in the most beautiful way. No, 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 no. As many of you know, Myra lives in a lovely penthouse in the Seaport district, an apartment that Richard and I helped her purchase years ago. The room was murmuring approvingly. Several guests turned to look at me with expressions of touched admiration. And tonight, in honor of Victoria's wedding, Myra has agreed to gift that penthouse to her sister as a wedding present. The applause was immediate, thunderous. Victoria leapt from her seat, tears streaming down her face, and ran to embrace our mother. "Mommy," she cried, "are you serious? Oh my God!" I stood frozen at table 14, my champagne flute suspended halfway to my lips. I had agreed to nothing. I had given nothing. My mother had just announced, to 247 of Boston's most connected people, a gift I had never offered. "Myra!" Eleanor's voice rang out, her arm extended toward me. "Come up here, sweetheart. Give your sister the keys." 247 pairs of eyes turned to face me, and I understood with sickening clarity that I had been set up from the beginning. Time does strange things in moments of crisis. The 15 seconds it took me to set down my champagne glass and rise from my chair felt like an eternity. I was aware of every detail with preternatural clarity: the whisper of my dress against my legs, the click of my heels on the marble floor, the soft murmur of the crowd parting to let me through. "Just smile and say yes," the old Myra whispered. "It's easier this way. You can figure it out later." But there was no later. Not for this. I climbed the 3 steps to the stage. The spotlight was blinding after the relative darkness of my corner table. Victoria stood beaming beside our mother, mascara streaking artfully down her cheeks. My mother gripped my arm as soon as I reached them. Her nails dug into my bicep, a warning. "There she is," Eleanor said into the microphone, all honey and warmth. "Our generous Myra." She angled me toward the crowd, one arm around my shoulder, positioning me for the photographer. "Now," she murmured, low enough that only I could hear, "don't embarrass me." I leaned toward the microphone. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "but there's been a misunderstanding." The murmuring stopped. "The penthouse isn't a gift." I turned to look directly at my mother. "Because it's mine. I bought it with my own money. I paid off the mortgage 3 years ago." Eleanor's smile didn't waver, but her grip on my arm tightened to the point of pain. "Sweetheart, we co-signed. You were removed from the deed in March of 2022. I kept my voice level. "I refinanced. It's solely in my name." The silence that followed was absolute. And then my mother moved. I didn't see it coming. One moment I was standing in the spotlight watching my mother's mask crack like fine porcelain. The next, her palm connected with my cheek in a strike that echoed through the Wellington ballroom like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side. The force of the blow sent my right earring, an 18-carat gold setting with a 2-carat diamond I'd bought myself when my fund crossed $500 million in assets, flying through the air. It struck the champagne flute of a gray-haired woman at the front table, producing a delicate ting before tumbling to the marble floor. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. Not my father, standing frozen near the bar with a whiskey in his hand. Not Victoria, whose tears had stopped midstream, replaced by something that looked almost like satisfaction. Not Bradley Hartley, who was already calculating whether this spectacle would affect his family's business relationships. My cheek burned. I could feel the shape of my mother's fingers imprinting on my skin, could already imagine the bruise that would bloom by morning. "You ungrateful!" my mother started, her voice shaking with rage. "Eleanor!" Someone, I think it was Patricia Hartley, said her name sharply. A warning. But my mother wasn't listening. Her face was twisted into something I'd never seen before, all pretense of composure abandoned. "After everything we did for you," she hissed. "Everything we sacrificed." I touched my cheek. My fingers came away clean. No blood, at least. When I finally spoke, my voice was calmer than I felt. "You just slapped me," I said slowly, "in front of 247 people, because I wouldn't give away something that legally belongs to me." Somewhere in the crowd, someone's phone was recording. The red light blinked like an accusation. I stepped off the stage. The crowd parted for me, not out of respect, but out of the same instinct that makes people step back from a car accident. No one wanted to be too close to whatever this was. I walked to where my earring had fallen, near the feet of a woman I vaguely recognized from my mother's charity board. She stared at me with a mixture of pity and fascination as I bent down and retrieved the diamond from the floor. The setting was undamaged. Small mercies. I straightened, took my time refastening the earring to my ear. The simple, deliberate gesture seemed to unsettle the crowd more than the slap itself. I wasn't crying. I wasn't running. I wasn't giving them the dramatic exit they expected. I was just reclaiming what was mine. On my way toward the exit, I passed Victoria's table. My sister sat rigid in her chair, her fairy tale wedding unraveling in real time. Bradley had his hand on her shoulder, but his eyes were on his mother, silently communicating damage assessments. I stopped. "Victoria." She flinched at the sound of her own name. "You have a $48,000 honeymoon at the Four Seasons Maldives," I said, loud enough for the tables around us to hear. "That's my wedding gift. The penthouse is mine. Bought with my money, paid off with my effort. We're clear." I didn't wait for a response. The lobby of the Harbor Grand was mercifully quiet. I pulled my phone from my clutch and dialed the only number that mattered. He answered on the first ring. "Myra?" "Harrison." My voice cracked for the first time all night. "I need you. Bring the documents." "I'm already on my way," he said. 17 minutes. He made it in 12. I waited in the lobby's private sitting area, a tucked-away alcove with velvet chairs and a view of the harbor through rain-streaked windows. The concierge had offered me ice for my cheek. I'd declined. The burning had dulled to a low throb, less painful than the replaying of my mother's face, contorted with rage, her hand raised high. Through the lobby's glass doors, I watched for Harrison's car. We'd met 2 years ago at the Boston Foundation for the Arts Annual Gala. I'd been hiding in my usual corner, nursing a glass of wine I didn't really want, when a man in a beautifully tailored navy suit had materialized beside me. "You're the one who wrote the Thornton acquisition analysis, aren't you?" he'd asked. No preamble, no small talk. "I read it last month. The risk modeling was exceptional." Harrison Whitmore. I'd known the name. Everyone in Boston's financial and legal circles did. Whitmore and Associates had been representing property deals in New England since 1952. His mother, Catherine Whitmore, had spent 23 years on the federal bench. But it wasn't his pedigree that had drawn me in. It was the way he'd looked at me, like I was worth seeing. "Why are you hiding?" he'd asked that night. "Because if I'm visible, someone might ask about my family." He'd nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. Some families are easier to love from a distance. We'd been together ever since, engaged for 6 months, and my parents still didn't know he existed. I told myself I was protecting him, but maybe I'd been testing something, proving to myself that someone could love me without the social cash of a Whitmore connection. Headlights swept across the lobby windows. A black Range Rover pulled up to the entrance, and Harrison stepped out into the rain. He was carrying a leather briefcase. Harrison moved through the lobby with the quiet confidence of a man who spent his days negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. His charcoal Tom Ford suit was slightly damp from the rain, but otherwise immaculate. The gray at his temples caught the lobby's warm lighting as he approached. "Let me see," he said, tilting my face toward the light with gentle fingers. The handprint had already begun to purple. He inhaled sharply, but didn't comment. Instead, he pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. "I have everything." He set the briefcase on the marble coffee table and unlatched the clasps. Inside, a navy blue folder bore the embossed logo of Whitmore and Associates in silver. "Deed of trust," he said, pulling out the first document. "Filed March 15, 2022. Sole owner, Myra Delacroix. Notarized and recorded with Suffolk County." I touched the paper's edge. Seeing it here, in the lobby of the hotel where my family had just tried to take everything from me, felt surreal. "Refinance completion letter from First Atlantic Bank." Another document joined the first. "Confirming payoff of original mortgage in full. All previous parties, including Richard and Eleanor Delacroix, were formally released from any claim." He laid out the final piece. 3 years of bank statements, each one highlighting the $14,200 monthly payments that had come solely from my personal account. "This is airtight," Harrison said. "No court in Massachusetts would entertain a claim against you. And no reasonable person could look at this and believe you owe them anything." I stared at the documents, a decade of work, distilled into paper and signatures. "There's one more thing." Harrison reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, cream-colored, elegant script. "Our wedding invitation, dated February 14th of next year. You don't have to do this alone anymore," he said. The Wellington ballroom had not recovered. I could hear the fractured hum of conversation before we even reached the doors, the particular pitch of voices that meant scandal was being processed in real time. When Harrison pushed open the heavy oak doors, the sound dampened like someone had pressed mute on a television. Inside, the wedding had technically continued. The band was playing something soft and forgettable. A few couples swayed on the dance floor with the stiff movements of people who'd rather be anywhere else. But most guests had clustered into groups, leaning toward each other with the intensity of stockbrokers during a market crash. My mother stood near the bar, surrounded by 3 women from the Heritage Foundation board. She was gesturing emphatically, her face still flushed. "Completely out of control," I heard her saying. "She's always been difficult, but this—" She stopped mid-sentence. Every head in that cluster turned toward the door, toward me, toward the man beside me. The recognition rippled through the room in waves. Harrison Whitmore wasn't just a successful attorney. He was Boston legal royalty. His firm had represented half the families in this room at one point or another. Patricia Hartley, mother of the groom, rose from her seat so quickly she nearly knocked over her wineglass. Her face had gone pale beneath her expertly applied blush. "Harrison?" her voice carried across the ballroom. "Harrison Whitmore?" He inclined his head. "Good evening, Patricia. It's been a while." I watched my mother's expressions cycle through confusion, recalculation, and finally, a dawning horror. Her daughter, her disappointing daughter, had just walked back into the reception on the arm of Harrison Whitmore, and she was beginning to understand that she had made a terrible mistake. My father was the first to approach. Richard Delacroix moved through the crowd with the determined stride of a man who'd spent 40 years closing deals. His face was florid, whether from whiskey or embarrassment I couldn't tell. Myra. He stopped 3 feet away, his gaze flicking between me and Harrison. What is this? Who is this man? I kept my voice level. Dad, this is Harrison Whitmore, my fiancé. The word landed like a grenade. Behind my father, I heard someone's champagne glass shatter against the floor. Victoria let out a strangled noise that might have been a laugh or a sob. Your fiancé? My father's voice cracked. Since when? You never said, We've been engaged for 6 months. I met his eyes without flinching. You never asked. Eleanor had pushed through the crowd, her silver gown catching the light as she positioned herself beside her husband. Her face was a study in barely controlled fury, but I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, recalibrating, reassessing. Mr. Whitmore. Her voice had shifted into the honeyed tone she reserved for potential donors. I apologize. I had no idea you and my daughter were acquainted. More than acquainted, Mrs. Delacroix. Harrison's reply was courteous but cool. And I should clarify, I'm not here as a guest. I'm here to ensure that my fiancé's legally owned property is not subject to any further misunderstandings. He opened his briefcase and withdrew the navy blue folder. These are the relevant documents. Myra is the sole owner of her penthouse as of March 15, 2022. I'm happy to walk anyone through the details who has questions. My mother's face went white, and I realized, with quiet satisfaction, that she finally understood exactly what she'd done. What would you do if you were in my position? Would you stay silent to keep the peace, or would you stand up for what's rightfully yours? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and if you're enjoying this story, please hit like and subscribe. Now, back to what happened next. My mother had not survived 30 years in Boston society by conceding gracefully. Mr. Whitmore. She stepped forward, positioning herself between Harrison and the cluster of onlookers. Her voice was pitched perfectly, reasonable, aggrieved, maternal. I appreciate your involvement, but I'm afraid you've been misled. She turned to address the room, arms spread in a gesture of helpless sincerity. My daughter has always had a complicated relationship with the truth. A sad smile. When she was younger, we chalked it up to imagination, but as she grew older, she let the implication hang. We purchased that apartment for her, my mother continued, gaining confidence from the audience's attention. Richard and I co-signed the mortgage because she came to us, begging. We took the financial risk. We made it possible. A few heads nodded. The narrative was familiar, ungrateful child, sacrificing parents. And now, when we simply asked her to share with her sister, on Victoria's wedding day no less, she throws a tantrum and runs to... She gestured vaguely at Harrison. Whoever this is. Victoria had appeared at my mother's elbow, dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She's always been jealous of me, she added, voice quavering. Ever since we were children. She can't stand to see me happy. I watched them work the room, 2 women perfectly calibrated to elicit sympathy. It might have worked. A year ago it would have worked, but Harrison was already laying documents on the nearest table, and the lawyer from Porter & Associates, the same firm that had represented our family for 15 years, was moving closer, his professional curiosity overriding social caution. Mrs. Delacroix, Harrison said, his tone utterly calm. I understand this is difficult, but I think we should let the documents speak for themselves. Harrison arranged the documents with the precision of a man who'd presented evidence in courtrooms across New England. First, he held up the deed. This is the recorded deed of trust from Suffolk County, dated March 15, 2022. It clearly lists one owner, Myra Ann Delacroix, no other parties. A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by the same instinct that slows traffic past accidents. Patricia Hartley stood near the front, her expression unreadable. Second, Harrison produced the bank letter. This is the refinance completion notice from First Atlantic Bank, confirming that the original mortgage was paid in full by Ms. Delacroix from her personal accounts. All previous signatories, including Richard and Eleanor Delacroix, were formally released from any legal obligation or claim at that time. I watched my father's face as the implications registered. His jaw tightened. Third, Harrison fanned out the bank statements. 36 months of payment records. Every withdrawal came from an account held solely in Myra's name. Total amount paid, $1,842,000 in principal and interest. Not a single dollar came from any other source. James Porter, the Delacroix family's longtime attorney, had made his way to the front. He picked up the deed with the careful attention of a man suddenly aware his professional reputation was at stake. He read it twice. Richard. His voice was measured, careful. These documents are valid, properly notarized, properly recorded. Ms. Delacroix is, legally speaking, the sole owner. My father opened his mouth, closed it. There is no claim here, James continued, setting down the paper. No ambiguity. The property belongs to your daughter, and there's no mechanism by which you could contest that. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more damning. My mother's performance had just collided with reality. The shift was palpable. It started as a murmur near the back of the room. A comment passed between two women in sequined gowns and rippled outward like wind through wheat. She said the apartment was theirs, but the paperwork is right there. Did you see when she slapped her? In front of everyone? I could track my mother's declining status in real time by the way people's bodies angled away from her. The Heritage Foundation board members who'd been clustered around her minutes ago had dispersed, forming new configurations that pointedly excluded Eleanor Delacroix. Patricia Hartley rose from her seat and crossed to her husband. They spoke in low, urgent tones, their eyes cutting toward my mother, then toward Victoria, then toward the exit. Eleanor, Patricia's voice carried just enough to be heard. I think we need to discuss a few things. Tomorrow, perhaps, after the emotions have settled. It wasn't a request. Patricia Hartley had spent 50 years navigating old money politics, and she knew a liability when she saw one. My mother's facade cracked further. Patricia, you have to understand. What I understand, Patricia said coolly, is that you made claims about property that weren't accurate, and you struck your daughter in front of my entire guest list. She straightened her Cartier bracelet. That's not the kind of association my family cultivates. From across the room, I watched Victoria absorb the implications. Her new mother-in-law was publicly distancing herself from the Delacroix family on Victoria's wedding night. The fairy tale was crumbling in real time, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one picking up the pieces. A new presence appeared at the ballroom entrance, and the whispers shifted again. Is that Judge Whitmore? My mother's composure finally shattered. You don't understand. Eleanor's voice pitched upward, losing the cultured modulation she'd spent decades perfecting. You don't know what she's really like. She pointed at me with a trembling finger, her carefully styled hair beginning to escape its pins. She's been lying to us for years, keeping secrets, and now she shows up with him. She gestured wildly at Harrison. Probably just to humiliate us. Mrs. Delacroix. Harrison's voice remained steady, almost gentle. I think you should lower your voice. Don't tell me what to do in front of your own guests? Harrison's gaze swept the room. The same guests who just watched you assault your daughter for refusing to give away her legally owned property? The word, assault, landed like ice water. My mother's face contorted. For a moment, I genuinely thought she might try to slap him too. You don't know anything about this family, she screamed. You don't know what we've sacrificed, what we've— Eleanor. My father's voice was sharp, urgent. He'd finally crossed the room, gripping her arm. Stop talking. But she couldn't. The mask had slipped too far. I am her mother. The words tore from her throat, primal and ugly. I have every right. No. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her hysteria. You don't. The ballroom fell silent again. You had 32 years of chances, I said. 32 years to treat me like your daughter instead of your disappointment. And tonight, you showed everyone exactly who you are. My mother's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The doors behind us opened again, and an elegant woman in black stepped into the ballroom. Harrison turned. Mom. Catherine Whitmore commanded attention without demanding it. She was 67 years old, silver-haired, dressed in a simple black sheath that probably cost more than my mother's entire outfit. Around her neck hung a single strand of pearls that I knew had been passed down through 4 generations of Whitmore women. 23 years on the federal bench. 12 years as a partner at Sullivan and Whitmore before that. Her name appeared in legal textbooks. Her opinions had shaped corporate law in Massachusetts for decades, and she was walking directly toward me. Myra, darling. She took my hands in hers, her grip warm and firm. Harrison called, Are you all right? Before I could answer, she turned my face gently to examine my cheek. Her expression hardened almost imperceptibly when she saw the bruising. I see, she said quietly. Patricia Hartley had risen again, recognition flickering across her face. Catherine? Catherine Whitmore? Hello, Patricia. Catherine's tone was pleasant but distant, the measured courtesy of equals. It's been some time. I didn't realize. Patricia's gaze moved between Catherine, Harrison, and me, recalculating. I didn't know your son was acquainted with the Delacroix family. He's more than acquainted. Catherine's hand rested on my shoulder, a simple gesture that rearranged the entire room's power structure. Myra is my son's fiancé. We're delighted to be welcoming her into our family. The whispers reached a fever pitch. Judge Catherine Whitmore, one of the most respected names in Massachusetts legal circles, was publicly claiming me as family, and my mother, who had spent her entire life chasing exactly this kind of social validation, had just slapped me in front of the woman she would have killed to impress. The irony was almost too perfect. Eleanor's face had gone gray. Catherine addressed the room with the same measured authority she'd once used to deliver verdicts. I understand there's been some confusion tonight about my future daughter-in-law's character and circumstances. Her voice carried effortlessly, no microphone needed. Allow me to clarify a few facts. She released my shoulder and stepped forward, commanding the space. Myra Delacroix has been a portfolio manager at Meridian Capital Partners for 8 years. She currently oversees assets worth $2.4 billion. She achieved this position through her own merit, her own intelligence, and her own relentless work ethic. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people were doing quick mental math. $2.4 billion was a number that demanded respect. The penthouse that has been discussed this evening? I visited it many times. It's a beautiful home, and Myra purchased it with money she earned through years of discipline and sacrifice. Catherine's gaze found my mother. What I witnessed as I arrived tonight, and what Harrison described to me, troubles me greatly. I have spent my career in service of the law, and I believe in certain fundamental principles. Among them, that a person's property belongs to them, that a child, even an adult child, deserves dignity, and that violence is never an acceptable response to disappointment. The weight of her words settled over the ballroom. I don't know what happened in this family to bring us to tonight, Catherine continued. But I do know this. Myra is a woman of integrity. She has earned everything she has, and from this point forward, she has the full support of the Whitmore family. She turned back to me and smiled, genuinely, warmly. The wedding is scheduled for February 14th at Trinity Church. We look forward to celebrating with those who truly care for her. The silence that followed was damning. I watched my mother's 30-year social empire crumble in real time. Patricia Hartley crossed the room to stand beside Catherine. The two women exchanged the kind of cordial greeting that spoke of shared circles and mutual respect. I had no idea, Patricia said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, that your family was connected to the Delacroix through Myra, Harrison's fiancé. She shook her head with practiced amazement. Eleanor never mentioned it. I imagine there's quite a bit Eleanor never mentioned, Catherine replied mildly. The implication landed like a slap, though far more effective than the physical one my mother had delivered. Around the room, the social reshuffling had begun in earnest. The couples who had been clustered near my mother's orbit were drifting away, gravitating toward the Whitmore-Hartley conversation like planets seeking a new sun. Eleanor stood alone now. Even my father had retreated to the bar, downing whiskey with the mechanical precision of a man who knew he'd lost but hadn't yet calculated the damages. I remembered every dinner party where my mother had dropped names and cultivated connections, every charity gala where she'd positioned herself next to the right people, every carefully calibrated social move designed to elevate the Delacroix name. She'd spent 3 decades building this, and in one night, because she couldn't accept that I had something she hadn't given me, she'd destroyed it. The guests were already rewriting the narrative. By tomorrow, the story would be clear. Eleanor Delacroix had publicly assaulted her successful daughter over a property dispute, and that daughter turned out to be marrying into the Whitmore family. In Boston society, that kind of scandal didn't fade. It echoed for years. Myra, Victoria's voice was thin, desperate. Myra, please. But I had nothing left to give her. Victoria intercepted me near the service entrance, her wedding dress catching on a chair as she pushed through the crowd. Myra, wait! Her voice had lost the affected sweetness I'd grown up hearing. You don't understand. Bradley's mother is already talking about. Talking about what, Victoria? My sister's mascara had fully surrendered. Black tracks streaked her cheeks, and her carefully curled hair was beginning to frizz at the temples. The prenup. She grabbed my arm with surprising force. She's saying they want to revisit some of the terms, something about protecting family reputation. I almost laughed. Almost. That sounds like a conversation between you, Bradley, and his lawyers. But you could talk to them. Victoria's grip tightened. You're engaged to Harrison Whitmore. His mother was a federal judge. If you just explained that Mom was having a bad night, that this isn't how we normally… Victoria. I gently removed her hand from my arm. Mom announced publicly that I had agreed to give you my home. When I corrected her, she slapped me, in front of everyone you were trying to impress. My sister's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw the girl she'd been before my parents had spoiled her into believing the world owed her everything. I didn't know, she whispered, about the apartment. I swear I didn't know it was actually yours. Mom said, I know what Mom said. My voice softened slightly. But at some point you have to ask yourself why you never questioned it. Bradley appeared at her elbow, his expression strained. Victoria, my parents want to talk. She looked at me one last time, desperate, scared, finally beginning to understand. Then she let Bradley lead her away. Okay, I need to pause here. Do you think I should forgive my family after everything that happened? Or do you believe setting clear boundaries is necessary? Tell me in the comments. And if this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe. Your support means everything. Now, let me tell you how this all ended. I walked to the center of the room. Not the stage. I wasn't interested in performing. Just a clear space near the head table where my voice would carry without a microphone. Harrison and Catherine flanked me, a silent wall of support. I want to say something, I began. And then I'm going to leave, because this is still my sister's wedding, and I don't want to take more attention from that than has already been taken. The guests who hadn't already drifted closer did so now. The photographer had lowered his camera, uncertain whether this moment should be documented. I didn't come here tonight to cause a scene. I came to celebrate Victoria's marriage and give her a gift I spent months planning. I kept my voice steady, factual. What happened on that stage wasn't my choice. I gestured toward the table where Harrison had laid out the documents. The facts are simple. I bought my apartment with money I earned. I paid off the mortgage 3 years ago. My parents were removed from the deed at that time. This is all documented, notarized, and a matter of public record. A few guests nodded slowly, others exchanged glances. I'm not asking for anyone's sympathy. I'm simply setting the record straight. I took a breath. From this point forward, I will attend family events when, and only when, I'm treated with basic respect. That's not a negotiation. It's not a punishment. It's a boundary. The word hung in the air. I wish Victoria and Bradley every happiness, I continued. The honeymoon I planned for them is still available if they choose to use it. That was, and remains, my wedding gift. I looked at my parents one final time. But my home is not on the table. It never was. Harrison stepped forward as I finished speaking. His presence commanded a different kind of attention, the crisp authority of a man who'd argued before appellate courts and negotiated deals worth 9 figures. I want to add something, he said, not as Myra's fiancé, but as an attorney. The room shifted, alert to the change in register. What happened tonight was, at minimum, assault. His voice was calm, factual, entirely professional. Witnesses observed it. Video evidence exists. Should Myra choose to pursue legal action, she would have standing. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere near the bar. My father's face had gone ashen. She has chosen not to, Harrison continued. Because despite what occurred, she still cares about this family. But I want to be absolutely clear about something. He paused, letting the silence do its work. If anyone, family member or otherwise, makes further false claims about Myra's property ownership, my office will treat that as defamation. If anyone attempts to access her residence without permission, that will be addressed as trespassing. These aren't threats, they're statements of legal fact. His gaze moved slowly across the room, landing briefly on each of my parents. Myra has spent 10 years building a career and a life through her own efforts. She deserves to be protected in that. And from this point forward, she will be. He stepped back to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. Catherine nodded once, approvingly. The message couldn't have been clearer. The days of treating Myra Delacroix as the family afterthought were over. My mother opened her mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it. For perhaps the first time in my memory, Eleanor Delacroix had nothing to say. I squeezed Harrison's hand. Time to go. Catherine embraced me before we left. You handled that beautifully, she murmured against my hair. I'm proud of you. The words hit harder than I expected. My own mother had never said them, not once in 32 years. Thank you for coming, I managed. You didn't have to. Of course I did. She pulled back, her hands on my shoulders, her eyes searching my face. Family shows up. That's what we do. And you're family now. I blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of these people. Harrison collected his briefcase while Catherine spoke quietly with Patricia Hartley. Something about lunch next week, maintaining appearances, the subtle mechanics of damage control for the Hartley family's sake rather than the Delacroix. As we walked toward the exit, I paused at Victoria's table. My sister sat alone. Bradley had been pulled into conversation with his parents across the room, his posture rigid with barely contained frustration. Victoria's champagne sat untouched, her wedding cake a pristine monument to a celebration that had derailed beyond repair. Victoria. She looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup irretrievable. Congratulations on your marriage, I said. I mean that. I hope you find happiness. How can you… She stopped, swallowed. After everything Mom did. That was Mom's choice, not yours. I held her gaze. But I need you to understand, things between us can't go back to how they were. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be built on honesty, not whatever story Mom has been telling. Victoria nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. I'll see you around, Victoria. I turned and walked out of the Wellington ballroom without looking back. Harrison's hand found the small of my back as we stepped into the quiet of the lobby. We were done here. The fallout began within 48 hours. I learned about it through a group text from Harrison's assistant, who monitored Boston society news as part of her job. The first domino fell on Monday morning. Boston Heritage Foundation Board requests interim leadership. The email arrived in Myra Delacroix's inbox at 9:17 a.m. from a board member named Patricia Coleman. Eleanor, following concerns raised by several members regarding recent public conduct, the board has voted 6-2 to request your temporary resignation as chairwoman. This is effective immediately, pending a formal review at next month's quarterly meeting. We appreciate your years of service and hope to resolve this matter with minimal disruption. Regards. Patricia Coleman, Acting Chair. I stared at the screenshot Harrison had forwarded me. 6 years of my mother's life, dismantled in a single paragraph. The second domino fell that afternoon. James Porter, the attorney who had represented my family for 15 years, called my father at 2:30 p.m. "Richard, I'm afraid I need to withdraw from your account." His voice, I imagined, would have been professionally regretful. "Given my testimony at the wedding regarding your daughter's property, there's an unavoidable conflict of interest. I can recommend several excellent colleagues." My father, according to the grapevine, had responded with a string of profanity that made the call mercifully brief. I read the updates from my penthouse, curled on the couch with a cup of tea and a view of the harbor. Part of me had expected to feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I felt something closer to exhaustion, like I'd been holding my breath for 32 years and had finally remembered how to exhale. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel Cross. "Daniel, heard about the wedding. You okay? Also, we need to talk about the Prometheus Fund. Call me tomorrow." Something new was beginning. Victoria called me exactly 1 week after the wedding. I was in my office at Meridian Capital when her name appeared on my phone. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me, maybe the same part that had walked back into that ballroom, answered. "Myra." Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow, younger. "I need to talk to you." "I'm listening." "It's the Hartleys." A shaky breath. "Patricia met with Bradley's father yesterday. They're saying they need to revisit the terms of the prenup." I set down my pen. "What kind of revisions?" "They want to extend the vesting period. From 5 years to 10, Victoria's voice cracked. "And they're adding a clause about reputational damage. If any member of my family causes material harm to the Hartley name, Bradley can claim the divorce was my fault." I understood immediately what had happened. Patricia Hartley was protecting her son's assets from the chaos that had erupted at his own wedding, chaos that traced directly back to my mother. "Victoria, that sounds like something you need to discuss with a lawyer, not me." "But you know Harrison, his family, they're—" She caught herself. "I'm sorry, I know that's not fair to ask." "No, it's not." Silence on the line. "Victoria," I said, more gently than I felt, "I can't fix what Mom broke. And I won't pretend everything is normal between us just because you need something from me." "I know," she whispered. "I know. I don't know what to do." For the first time in our lives, my sister was facing a problem that couldn't be solved by someone else stepping in to sacrifice for her. "Figure it out," I said. "That's what adults do." I hung up. My father called 2 weeks after the wedding. I was on my balcony watching a storm roll in across the harbor when his name appeared on my screen. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then I answered. "Myra." His voice was gruff, uncertain, not the commanding tone I'd grown up fearing. I wanted to talk." "About what?" "About—" A pause. "About the apartment. The mortgage. I didn't know you'd refinanced. Your mother told me—" "Dad!" I cut him off. "You could have asked me directly. At any point in the last 3 years. You didn't." Silence. I know. The admission seemed to cost him something. I should have. I just. I let your mother handle the family things. The family things. 3 decades of neglect, reduced to a management delegation. Why are you really calling, Dad? More silence. I could hear him breathing, gathering himself. The Whitmore family. Harrison's mother. She knows people. Important people. His voice shifted, gaining that salesman's warmth I recognized from his dealership commercials. I was thinking, maybe we could have dinner. All of us. Clear the air. Start fresh. And there it was. The real reason. Not reconciliation. Not remorse. Networking. Dad, I'm not going to introduce you to the Whitmores so you can make business contacts. That's not. Yes, it is. My voice was tired rather than angry. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with honesty, with actually caring about who I am, not who I'm connected to. Myra, call me when you're ready for that, not before. I ended the call and watched the storm clouds gather. Lightning flashed over the harbor, illuminating the city I'd fought so hard to build a life in. I was done being a means to someone else's end. Daniel Cross asked me into his office the following Wednesday. The CFO of Meridian Capital Partners had a corner suite on the 34th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. He was the only person at the firm who knew about my family situation. I'd told him years ago, after a particularly brutal holiday visit had left me crying in the break room at 7 a.m. "Close the door," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "And stop looking so nervous. This is good news." I sat, folding my hands to keep them from fidgeting. "The Prometheus Fund," Daniel began. "New vehicle, $800 million initial capitalization, focus on emerging tech and sustainable energy." He slid a folder across the desk. "We need a lead manager, someone with vision, discipline, and a track record of outperforming projections." I opened the folder. Inside was a term sheet with my name at the top. Daniel. 3 partners voted unanimously. His weathered face creased into a rare smile. "You've earned this, Myra. Your Q3 numbers were exceptional. Your risk modeling is the best in the firm. And frankly, after what I heard about the wedding, the board was impressed by how you handled yourself." "You heard about that?" "Half the partners were at that wedding," Daniel said dryly. "The Peterson brothers have been talking about it all week. Something about grace under fire." I stared at the term sheet. Lead manager, $800 million in assets. A seat at the table I'd been working toward for a decade. "The wedding had nothing to do with this decision," Daniel added. "But it didn't hurt to remind people what kind of person you are." He extended his hand. "Congratulations, Myra. You've built something real here. Don't let anyone take that from you." I shook his hand, blinking back tears. 6 months after Victoria's wedding, I was standing in the Trinity Church vestibule, adjusting the delicate lace of my wedding veil. Catherine had insisted on the venue. 4 generations of Whitmore weddings had taken place beneath its soaring Gothic arches. I'd agreed, secretly grateful that the decision had been taken out of my hands. The guest list had been the harder negotiation. 180 people. Harrison's extended family, colleagues from Meridian, friends I'd made in the years since I'd stopped trying to earn my parents' approval, Catherine's former law clerks, the Peterson brothers from the board. Eleanor and Richard Delacroix were not among them. "You're sure?" Harrison had asked 3 months ago when we'd finalized the invitations. "Once they're not invited, that door closes." "The door was closed the night she slapped me," I'd said. "I'm just finally locking it." He hadn't argued. Victoria's invitation had been more complicated. In the weeks after the wedding disaster, she'd called several times, not asking for favors anymore, just talking. About her marriage, about therapy, about the realization that she'd spent her whole life playing a role our mother had scripted for her. In February, I'd mailed her an invitation. She'd called the next day crying. "You don't have to forgive me," she'd said, "but thank you for giving me a chance." I didn't know if I forgave her. I wasn't sure forgiveness worked like a light switch, on or off, all at once. Maybe it was more like dawn, gradual, uncertain, impossible to pinpoint the exact moment darkness became light. But I'd decided to find out. The organ began to play. Harrison was waiting at the altar, and for the first time in 32 years, I walked forward into my own future, not my family's expectations. The conversation happened the night before my wedding. Victoria came to my penthouse, the one our mother had tried to take, the one I'd bought with 10 years of labor and discipline and refusal to give up. We sat on my balcony, wrapped in blankets against the February chill, watching the harbor lights flicker. "I need to apologize," she said. "Really apologize. Not like before." I waited. "At your wedding rehearsal dinner yesterday, I watched Harrison's mother give a toast." Victoria's voice was quiet. "She talked about how proud she was of you, how you'd built something real, how you'd never compromised your integrity." She turned to face me, and I realized no one in our family has ever said that to you. Not once. Not Mom, not Dad, not me. Her eyes glistened. "We just took and took and expected you to keep giving." "Victoria, let me finish." She held up a hand. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that I see it now. What Mom did to you. What we all did. And I'm sorry." The wind off the harbor carried salt and cold. Somewhere below, a car horn honked. "I've been in therapy," Victoria continued. "4 months now. Bradley's paying for it, probably out of guilt, but I don't care. The point is, I'm starting to understand why I never questioned things, why I believed whatever Mom said." She reached out and took my hand. "I want to be your sister again, Myra. A real sister. Not the way we were before. But maybe something new, something honest." I squeezed her fingers. "That's going to take time," I said. "And work. From both of us." "I know." She nodded. "I'm willing to try." For now, that was enough. The reception was winding down when Harrison found me on the church terrace. February in Boston meant cold, but the venue had set up heating lamps and fir throws. A few guests lingered with champagne, breath misting in the night air. "There's my wife." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "How are you feeling?" "Tired? Happy? A little overwhelmed." I leaned back against his chest. "Is that allowed on your wedding day?" "I think it's mandatory." We watched the city lights together. The same harbor view as my penthouse, but from a different angle, a new perspective. "Do you regret not inviting them?" Harrison asked quietly. We both knew who he meant. I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally. "I spent 32 years hoping they would see me, hoping that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, gave enough, they would finally treat me like I mattered." I turned in his arms to face him. That hope was killing me, and letting it go, choosing myself instead, that's not something I regret. It's something I should have done years ago. Harrison kissed my forehead. "For what it's worth, I see you. My mother sees you. Everyone in that church today saw you." "I know," I smiled. "That's why I'm not sad. I lost one family, but I found another. I found you." Below us, the city hummed with its usual Saturday night energy. People going about their lives, carrying their own stories, their own wounds, their own quiet victories. "Boundaries aren't walls," I said, more to myself than to him. "They're doors. I get to choose who walks through." He pulled me closer. "Then let's go inside, Mrs. Whitmore. Your new family is waiting." Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or made to feel less than, I hope this shows you that your worth isn't determined by the people who refuse to see it. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's survival, and sometimes, walking away from people who hurt you is the bravest thing you can do. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment telling me about your own experience. I read every single one, and your stories matter to me. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future stories. Check the description below for more stories about strength, boundaries, and finding your own path. Until next time, take care of yourselves. You're worth protecting.